is it necessarily the case that in low liquidity, the price would rise? I could imagine that Bitcoin would just as easily get smushed, to use Novogratz's terminology, in low liquidity. I mean, somebody's got to be there to lift the offer, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in a situation of low liquidity, low volumes compared to what we've seen traditionally, but that's kind of typical when you're, not in a roaring bull market, and it's been a good couple of years now. So most of the institutions have more or less left the space. There's just not as much interest as there was, and of course the liquidity concerns are tied to this Operation Choke Point 2.0, as it's being called, the way that the US government is encouraging its regulators to kind of put pressure on banks that deal with crypto and that kind of thing. So, there are a lot of different players all sort of pulling back from the space. And as you quite rightly say, that means that Bitcoin is bound to be more volatile in an upwards direction, but also possibly, in a downwards direction. We're already seeing volatility rise, and it could get worse. So don't be surprised if we get, big moves in one direction or another. But actually, I'm bullish, like Mike Novogratz. Not perhaps as bullish as him. He's like, I'm totally bullish and investors are energized. Now, I wouldn't go quite that far. We're still just sort of days in this rally, but nonetheless, we're seeing bullish signs. We've seen Bitcoin react in a very positive way, despite all of that bad news that we've seen. It's looking good to me.
Well, Glenn, I've had so many conversations here in Washington about Operation Choke Point 2.0. That's something I've been hearing for weeks now. And it also suggests that perhaps in the longer term, the U.S. is going to be a less friendly place for crypto in general. So what fills the gap? What does that indicate about how long these liquidity challenges could persist?
It's a tough one because we just don't know what the US government is going to encourage regulators to do next, or indeed what the regulators will do off their own bat. We know that they're pretty negative and are bearing down on crypto. How much damage can they actually do? Potentially quite a lot. Let's face it, this is the United States we're talking about. It is the big kahuna country for finance throughout the entire world. And the dollar is the global reserve currency. All of this is crucially important. And yes, they really could bear down on Bitcoin. Okay, they're not affecting the price at the moment, but the whole crypto space is sort of running for cover. And until the crypto space sort of finds other countries that perhaps it feels more comfortable in, those might turn out to be the EU or even the UK, where I'm based. Over here, we're hearing much more positive sounds out of the government, or of course, parts of the Far East might turn out to be more hospitable. So it's not necessarily the end of the road for the crypto industry if the US turns against it, but it's certainly a major stumbling block, let's be honest.
Yeah, well, Glenn, you just said there essentially that policymakers and regulators to this point aren't affecting the price. So what is affecting the price? What kind of correlations do you see? How is Bitcoin tied and or not to the macro picture right now?
Right. Well, this is the good news, really, and it's partly why I'm still bullish on Bitcoin. It's because, as you rightly said, the stock markets are now, or Matt rightly said, the stock markets are now in more of a bull market than they were before. And NASDAQ in particular, of course, has been doing very well. And when you look at the correlation between NASDAQ and Bitcoin, the same correlation we've been talking about for more than a year now. It started in November 2021 when Bitcoin started going down along with tech stocks. The ups and downs kind of mirrored each other all the way down. And now, on the way back up, it's the same story. This is not a coincidence, okay? Investors have kind of put Bitcoin and Ethereum to some degree in the same pot as tech stocks. So they're considered, risky. They're considered risk assets now, certainly. But there's also a parallel story, which kind of muddies the picture a bit, but is also good for Bitcoin, which is, of course, this flight to safety after the banking crisis that we had just a few weeks ago. Some people are now again starting to see Bitcoin as a possible monetary alternative to the dollar. And why do I believe that? Because look at the correlation between Bitcoin and gold. Bitcoin and gold both rising. Gold is benefiting from that same effect of people fleeing to a different kind of money, and likewise, people fleeing to Bitcoin at the same time. So you've got a kind of double reason, really, why Bitcoin is going up at the moment. On one hand, you've got tech stocks going up. On the other hand, you've got gold going up.
Glenn,
both of them are encouragements to the price.
Glenn, I learned very early on that you never share your private key with anybody. I had some Bitcoin stolen from me on live television about 10 years ago. Do you think that investors are moving a substantial amount of their holdings off of centralized exchanges and either keeping them, in cold storage at home or putting them in decentralized exchanges?
We certainly seem to be seeing a fair amount of that going on, yes. Is it enough to make a massive difference to the overall picture and liquidity? It's certainly making a difference, yeah. And but at the same time, it's a good thing, isn't it? Like you just said, not your keys, not your crypto, they always say. And that's true. And if people have learned the lessons from FTX, then that's a fantastic thing. And now, of course, with Binance, the CFTC coming down on Binance, people got scared again, withdrawing money from Binance. And of course, that's the world's biggest exchange by far. So as a crypto enthusiast, I really don't want to see Binance get into serious trouble or Binance to fail. That would be really, really annoying apart from anything else. We wouldn't be left with any massive exchanges. All we'd have left is Coinbase, which is far smaller.
All right, Glenn, I think you'd get a lot of pushback on that. Some people would welcome that turn of events, but they have to be the seriously old school OG crypto traders. Glen Goodman, or holders, right? Or hodlers.